You think you know history? You know the dates, the names, the glossy footage from Mission Control. You know Neil Armstrong's step and the grainy pictures the press served to the world. But you do not know everything. Not by a long shot. I can't show you the original files. They're locked behind an official Secrets Act that won't expire for decades, maybe never. If the papers keep getting reclassified the way they always do, copies that ended up in my hands were taken away. The documents I saw were burned in a Whitehall furnace. I watched them go up in orange flame, but I remember when it happened, and I remember what they told me in that windowless room. In the middle of June, 1989, I remember the photographs. The way the men in the room looked away when the worst images came up. The way a senior officer sighed, the ink on his files trembling as if the paper itself had heard something. My name isn't important. The exact date isn't important. What matters is where I was and what I saw. At the time, I was a university psychologist. Nothing glamorous. I taught, I read case files. I'd spent a stretch working in high-security psychiatric care. I was good at keeping a cool head. I thought I could keep it then, too. Then two men in plain suits walked into my study and told me I was required, that was their word, to attend a meeting in Westminster. They were polite in a military, bureaucratic way. They parked a black Jaguar outside the department, and the drive was wordless. Inside the car, the passenger clicked occasionally at a CB radio. That should have been my first warning. Radio chatter like a relic, a machine the world had mostly forgotten. They led me to a small, windowless office. The lack of daylight didn't matter when the carpet would have cost a Navy hospital a month's budget. The room smelled of old cigars and colder things. Then the door opened and in came a dozen men. Some were English-tailored suits, the heavy tread of people used to walking through government corridors. Some were not. They had the clipped cadence of ex-Soviet officers. They carried thick folders full of glossy BW prints. They argued, then fell silent when one older man spoke, and everyone listened. The last human footprints on the moon were dated the 14th of December 1972, he said, his accent a harsh undercurrent. It has been what? Almost 20 years. We must know if they are still there. I blinked. The room seemed to bend into silence. They all came back, I said, too quickly. Apollo 17 returned. They were, he smiled without mirth. Do you really believe your own press? Do you think we are afraid of mere husks of men? No. What if they did not leave? What if something else remained? That's when he slid the stapled pack across the table toward me. The front page was stamped in thick ink, classified level 7. I should have refused. I should have walked out. Instead, I opened it. The photographs were simple, ugly black and white, taken from a camera lens that had survived far too much. The first showed the lunar surface, recognizable mostly by its horizon. Far off, something like a structure stood against the stark horizon, impossible and wrong in the scale of that empty world. The next image was of a lander, not our proud, whole modules, but one cut as cleanly as a loaf sliced down the center, not torn in some dramatic collision, severed. The metallic skin was literally parted and laid open, neat as a butcher's cut. Block letters on the side. I could not be sure which mission it came from. Only that the camera had not lied, then the worst one. A spacesuit on the regolith. Its helmet cracked, and the occupants scattered in pieces. Not blown apart by pressure or explosion. Ripped out with a violence that suggested grip and purpose. Other suits lay down the slope, in odd, careful groups, dozens of yards apart. With the awkward geometry of something having moved them. They told a story that didn't belong in any history book I studied. They told of a Soviet mission to the moon in October 1968, long before a lot of Western audiences thought the Soviets were even close. A mission that landed quietly, secretly, 6 kilometers from some of the American landing sites. They landed in, for a few hours, radioed back images and telemetry. Then the signal stopped. The official line, at the time, was a fuel cell failure, a technical problem that stranded men above a hard, unforgiving surface. But the photographs in that file suggested something else. Not a failure, but a slaughter. Not a storm, but a deliberate, physical ripping of suits and bodies and machines. Why tell me this? I asked. I had no authority here. Why drag a university psychologist into a room like this? The reply came slow. The Russian, tall, stern eyes, like chipped ice, clicked his cigar and leaned in, because later, he said, the Americans found something else. In 1972, when Apollo 17 landed, their crew saw things. They saw a module that was not theirs. They saw dark figures moving, heads turned. An American official replied through the cigarette smoke. We thought at first the men were hysterical. They wanted to come home immediately. We insisted they stay. The service module was in the wrong orbit. But from inside the lunar module, they watched shapes pick over the objects outside. We had men 20 feet away from these figures, protected only by the shell of their module. The rest was not pretty. One of the Apollo 17 crew had spoken afterward to people who would listen. He was not the man who stepped out onto the tarmac and smiled on camera. He was thin, nervous, and he said things that made the room go cold. He said the shapes were like blackened shadows with the silhouette of limbs. He said they had no eyes, and yet they had looked where there were eyes and reached into thoughts. He spoke of a feeling, not of being watched, but of being emptied, of being held up and exposed inside their own skulls. When the slides showed a grainy silhouette, an outline of something tall, 9 or 10 feet, with spidery limbs, half of the men in that room shifted in their chairs as if a cold hand had reached into each of them. You are a psychologist, the Russian said to me. We need to know if another mission is affected in this way. Can you fix their minds? Can you bring them back? I felt my mouth dry. This was not a clinic evaluation. It wasn't therapy you could bounce in on for a few weeks. This was a warning, a call to action, and an accusation, all in one. The human mind will not survive this, they said. Perhaps a trained hand could, I protested, as any sane man would. I work with people who can't leave these doors. I'm not a savior. I am not equipped to treat something at 250,000 miles away. They were insistent. They told me where the launch would be, an old Soviet site, and when. They explained the mission profile. December 22nd, 1990. 3 crew members, 1 British, 2 Russian, pilot and engineers, trained, sealed, fixed. Then they told me nothing else and drove me back to my university in the same black car. If I'd had any sense, I would have put the files in a drawer and left them there. I didn't. I put them in a folder. I told myself to forget. I taped over the edges in the quiet of my study and let the mundane world of lectures and case notes cover the horror for a while. But a few months later, in January 1990, the phone rang. It was the same voice. Be at Whitehall tomorrow. Come with the documents. I did not want to. I told them so. They told me I would not be required to do any experiments, only to attend, to observe, to be present if needed. I took the briefcase with the photographs because I hoped, stupidly, that seeing them again would make them less real. They led me not to the windowless room this time, but downstairs, to the furnaces. The atmosphere smelled of metal and hot air. Kratsov, the same severe man, greeted me. It failed, he said flatly. It was not a communications failure. The module was stripped. The crew decapitated. The videotape showed it. My hands cold as ice. I felt the floor tilt. He told me the timestamps. They landed at 3:45 on Christmas Day, 1990. At 3:47, the cameras picked up movement outside. At 3:48, the high-speed printers at Mission Control spit out the same warning over and over in long lines of capital letters. Do not return. Do not land. Stay away. They waited for us, Kratsov said. They have warned us twice, and twice we have ignored it. To return would be to declare war, not with missiles, but with the mind. He reached out and I handed him the folder. He walked with it to a chute that led to a furnace. I wanted to keep a copy. I wanted proof. I told myself I would act later if needed, but at his nod, I watched the documents vanish in the orange throat of that furnace. When the lid clanged shut, he told me, almost casually, officially, this never happened. They were not subtle. We may need you again, Kratsov said. When we ask, it will not be optional. Then they left. I went home with the taste of metal behind my teeth. The images had not left my head. I kept thinking of the suits scattered like discarded shells. I kept thinking of the eyes that were not eyes. For 7 months, after that first meeting, I tried to forget. I buried myself in my work. I convinced myself the photographs were doctored, or some cruel psychological test designed to measure how a man reacts to horror. I told myself the Soviets and the British had better things to do in 1989 than to play ghost stories with professors. And then came January 1990, the same black Jaguar, the same two silent men, the same cold hand of inevitability. They said the words like they were nothing. Bring the documents. Tomorrow, you'll attend. I told them I wasn't going to help, and they agreed. No psychology, no experiments, just attend. When I arrived at Whitehall, the atmosphere was different. Not political, not bureaucratic, heavier. Instead of the small room upstairs, they led me below, down into the cellars, where the air smelled of iron and ash. Kratsov was there, the Russian. Only this time, he did not waste breath. His first words were simple. The mission failed. My stomach turned to stone. Communications, I whispered. Technical. He shook his head, slowly. Neither. The figures, they were waiting. He told me the times, as if reading from an autopsy. 3:45 a.m. Christmas Day. Damage lens 3:47 antes do meio-dia. Crew visible on the monitor less 3:48 alto m. They are decapitated. 3 men. 1 British, 2 Russian, gone in less than 3 minutes. And as if the horror wasn't enough, every printer at Mission Control began spitting the same line, over and over. Thousands of sheets of it. Stay away from the moon. Do not return. Consequences will follow. I wanted to argue. I wanted to cling to reason. Maybe an engine had blown. Maybe a suit had ruptured. Maybe the printers malfunctioned. But Kratsov's eyes cut me off. There was no failure, he said. Not mechanical, not human. This was deliberate. Then he said the line that has stayed with me ever since. They have warned us twice. We will not get a third. The room was quiet, except for the dull roar of the furnace down the hall. He asked for the documents. My briefcase felt heavier than iron as I passed it into his hands. He walked into the furnace room, rolled the papers into a loose coil, and dropped them into the chute. A blast of orange light filled the corridor. The smell of scorched ink and photographs filled my lungs, and with that, the last physical proof was gone. Kratsov slammed the lid closed. His voice was final. Officially, this mission never took place. As long as you have made no copies, there is nothing to trace. Remember, comrade, this was not a failure. This was a warning. When I turned to leave, he called after me, his hand extended, cold and firm. We may need you again one day, and next time, your assistance will not be optional. I walked out into the night with my head full of shadows. But even as I crossed Westminster Bridge, the thought kept repeating in my mind like the printers had burned it there. Asterisk, I tried to convince myself it was over after that night in Whitehall. After the furnace roared and the documents turned to ash, I buried the memory in the deepest part of my mind. Years passed. The Soviet Union collapsed. The world moved on, and so did I, or at least I tried. By 1997, my life looked ordinary again. I lectured. I worked in hospitals. I studied the human mind in safer, clinical settings. The Official Secrets Act still chained my tongue, but the nightmares reminded me what had happened. Those dreams of black figures on the lunar horizon, of shadows that stared without eyes. And then, in a hotel bar in West London, I heard a voice I thought I would never hear again. Comrade. The word cut through the chatter like a blade. I turned, and there he was, Kratsov, the same Russian commander who had burned the documents before my eyes. Only now, he looked smaller, not weaker, but older. Civilian clothes, a brandy glass in one hand, a cigar in the other. I walked over, my heart hammering against my ribs. Kratsov, what are you doing here? He smiled faintly. Not here for a diagnosis, if that's what you think. We sat at a quiet table on the edge of the bar. He seemed almost human now, stripped of medals and uniforms, but the weight in his voice hadn't changed. When I pressed him, he admitted the truth. After the USSR fell, he adapted. He traded in liquidated assets, tanks, weapons, vehicles, sold them off to whichever small nations could pay the right price. He had become a businessman of war, but then his tone shifted. His eyes darkened. There are some assets, he said, lowering his voice, that cannot be sold. I knew what he meant before he said it. The moon, the mission, the warning. I asked him why they had sent those men in 1990, if they already knew what waited there. His expression hardened. Because we had to be sure, he whispered, and now we are. For a moment, I felt the air turn heavy again, like that furnace room years earlier. I asked him one final question. Are they still up there? Kratsov's eyes didn't blink. His voice was barely audible. They never left. I didn't want to believe him. I wanted to tell myself. Kratsov was drunk, bitter, trying to frighten me with Cold War ghost stories. But his voice carried no jest, no weakness. He wasn't speculating. He was remembering. They never left, he had said. I stared into my drink, the weight of his words crushing me. If that's true, then why haven't they attacked us already? Why wait all these years? Kratsov leaned closer, his brandy glass trembling slightly in his hand. They have attacked us, comrade. Just not in the way you think. You ever wonder why so many astronauts, why so many come back broken? They smile for the cameras, but inside, shattered. My mind flashed to the Apollo 17 crew. The actors paraded before the world while the real men wasted away in silence, tormented by visions no human mind could withstand. They don't need to fight us with weapons, Kratsov continued. They fight us with memory, with fear, with the psyche itself. You saw the documents. You saw what happened in 1990. That wasn't war. That was a demonstration. I wanted to walk away, pretend none of this mattered anymore, but a terrible thought clawed its way into my mind. What if, I whispered, we go back? Kratsov's face twisted, half in rage, half in despair. They told us not to. They warned us. Stay away, or face consequences beyond imagining. And yet, his voice cracked. I hear whispers. Comrade, America is planning again. New rockets, new missions, not just to orbit, but to land. He drained his glass and slammed it on the table. They don't know what waits for them. Or perhaps they do, and they think they can fight it. But you and I both know the truth. You can't fight what you cannot see. You can't kill what doesn't bleed. The silence between us was suffocating. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that humanity could conquer anything with enough science, enough courage, enough firepower. But the memory of those black photographs burned into my mind. The shadowy figures towering over the lunar horizon, the suits torn open, the bodies decapitated. No, he wasn't wrong. I asked him one last question, my voice trembling. Then why tell me this now? Why not let me forget? Kratsov leaned in so close I could smell the smoke of his cigar clinging to his breath. His voice was cold as ice. Because, when they come, comrade, you will remember, and you will understand. I wish I could say I left Kratsov that night and never thought about it again. I wish I could say I laughed it off, convinced myself he was just a paranoid old man, but I couldn't. That night, sleep didn't come easily, and when it finally did, it wasn't sleep at all. I dreamed of the moon, not the bright silver disk we admire in the sky, but the dark side, the hidden face. Its surface stretched endlessly, shadow upon shadow, craters like yawning mouths. And then, on the horizon, they appeared, tall, black, silent. They did not move like men. They did not move like beasts. They simply were, watching, waiting. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. My clock read 3:17 a.m. I wanted to shake the image away, tell myself it was only a dream, but then I saw it. On my window, AHANDPRINT. Not mine. I stumbled back, my heart hammering. The window was locked, the curtains half drawn, but the shape on the glass, long fingers, too long, stretching wider than any human hand, glistened under the pale moonlight. I froze. My mind screamed at me to call someone, anyone, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I just stood there, staring, until slowly, the imprint began to fade, as if the glass itself was swallowing it whole. By morning it was gone, no trace of anything. I tried to convince myself it was condensation, a trick of light, but deep down, I knew better. It wasn't a dream, it wasn't imagination. It was a reminder. Kratsov's words came back to me, sharper than ever. They don't fight with weapons. They fight with memory. That was when I realized the most terrifying truth of all. They hadn't stayed on the moon. They never left. I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. The dream, the handprint, the way the night seemed to hold its breath around my cabin. I needed answers. The next day, I went back to the library, digging through everything I could find. Declassified reports, old newspaper clippings, even conspiracy forums that most people would laugh at. But the deeper I went, the colder I felt. There were stories, dozens of them. A man in Nebraska who swore he saw figures walking across his backyard on a night when the moon was only a sliver in the sky. Men in Oregon who claimed a tall, shadowed figure pressed its face against her window, though she lived on the 12th floor. And then there were the reports that never reached the public. I shouldn't have seen them, but I did. A leaked folder from a government investigation into something called Project Eclipse. One of the pages described persistent nocturnal visitations, but not dreams, not hallucinations. Physical evidence, prints, residues, even DNA samples that didn't match any known species on Earth. I froze when I read the dates. Most of the reports weren't from decades ago. They were recent. Some as recent as last year. And then, I found something that made my blood run cold. A scanned page from a field agent's journal. It was brief. Only 2 sentences. They are watching me through the windows, no matter where I go. They find the glass. My hands trembled as I shut the laptop, because I knew this wasn't just Kratsov's madness. It wasn't just my imagination. It was happening everywhere. And somehow, the government knew. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the cabin, every sway of the trees outside, every rustle of leaves made my skin crawl. By midnight, the air felt heavy, charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm. I kept all the windows locked, curtains drawn, lights off. Still, I sat awake, clutching the pistol I never thought I'd actually need. And then it began. A sound faint, almost polite. A tap on the glass. I froze. My body refused to move. Another tap. Louder, this time, like fingernails dragging across the window pane. I forced myself to stand, step by trembling step. and pulled back the curtain just an inch. That was when I saw it. A face, but not a human face. It was stretched, distorted skin pale as milk, lips too thin, teeth too sharp. Its eyes were wrong, too large, glowing faintly with a sick yellow light. It tilted its head like a curious animal, and with a slow, deliberate motion, it lifted one long, crooked finger and pressed it against the glass. The handprint it left behind was exactly like the ones I'd been finding for weeks. And then it smiled. Not a human smile, something broken, twisted, as though it had learned by watching but never quite understood. The air in the cabin dropped ice. My breath fogged in front of me, and for the first time in years, I felt like a child again, helpless, staring into something my mind couldn't explain. Its lips moved, but no sound came, and then, with a sudden snap, the glass of the window cracked. I stumbled backward, pistol raised, heart pounding in my ears. But by the time I blinked, it was gone, vanished into the night, leaving only the spiderweb fracture in the glass, and the fresh handprint burned into it. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, and when dawn finally came, I realized something that chilled me even more than what I'd seen. The handprint on the glass, it was on the inside. I didn't leave the cabin that morning. I sat frozen in the corner, with my back against the wall, pistol in my lap, eyes darting from window to window. Every shadow felt alive. Every sound, the creak of wood, the whisper of wind felt deliberate. By noon, I convinced myself I had imagined it all. Maybe the isolation, the sleepless nights, and my own paranoia had twisted my senses. Maybe. But then I saw it, on the front door's glass, a new handprint. This one was clearer than ever before. Too clear. I could see every line, every crease in the skin, every jagged edge of the fingernail. And it wasn't just one print. It was dozens, covering the glass. Inside, outside, everywhere. I backed away, heart racing, when I heard it again. The tapping. Slow, steady. From behind me. I spun, raising my gun, and dropped it, because standing there, in the middle of the room, was me, my exact reflection. Same clothes, same face, same terrified expression, except its eyes glowed that same sickly yellow dot. It raised its hand and pressed its palm against the glass of the nearest window, leaving yet another mark. And then it whispered, my own voice, warped and wrong, "Let me in." The glass shattered. The last thing I remember was the sound of breaking windows, dozens of them all at once, and the sight of handprints smearing across every surface of the cabin. When I woke, it was morning. The cabin was quiet, too quiet, but the windows, every single one of them was covered, inside and out, with handprints. And I knew then, with a certainty that froze me to my core, I hadn't been left alone, not that night, not ever again.